Well, good morning, everybody. Good morning, and thank you for coming. You are the elite parents of the school, because it's very interesting when you present a lot of talks around parents' workshops and how we can all as parents learn to support our children better. There are some workshops which are enormously popular. That's always to do with early years. Early years parents are always very keen.
They're always in, especially if it's the first time they've been a parent. You can hardly keep them away from things. You know, they're constantly in. I'd like to learn how to support my child better. But as soon as you get into thorny subjects like, dare I say it, mathematics, or if a child is slightly older, then parents have a mixture of feelings. They often either feel, yeah, but why do you want me to come into a workshop? Because my child is 13, I've handed them over to you. This is my time off. Or mathematics, I'm terrified that you're going to actually ask me to solve out loud a complicated quadratic equation. I daren't come to a workshop about maths. It's a little similar with this morning's topic, which is reading with slightly older children. So children that are towards the back end of Key Stage 2. So they're aged from about 8 through to whatever you want to think of that as. It could be 11, it could be 13, wherever your child is. And the reason that I'm being slightly vague about the age range is because, of course, children read at a chronological point which might be different from their age. So for instance, they might be 8 years old, but they might have the reading age of a 10-year-old. They might be 10 years old, but have the reading age of an 8-year-old. And so that's all part of the development process. And you don't need to be anxious about that. That's something that is part of what makes us all who we are, that we develop at different rates. And some children at one point in their life seem to be way ahead of the field, but at other points in their life actually are slightly behind the field. That's all okay. And it's all part of that rich journey into reading and enjoying literature that we want. So that's what we're going to think about today. And for many parents, because their child has overcome that initial barrier, that learning to bark at the print, and that means look at a letter, know what sound it makes and be able to pronounce that, and then look at a collection of letters and know that actually that's forming a word and be able to say that word. And then fundamentally after that, being able to look at a collection of letters, know that it's a word, say that word, and understand what that word means. Because parents are happy generally within primary schools that their child has passed that stage, they tend to think, well, my child is a reader. And so my work here is done. It's now up to my child's natural sense of curiosity to move on. Well, those of us that are parents to children that are older, or have had children that have gone through this older stage, know that actually it's not quite as simple as that. Because learning to bark at the print, learning to be able to form words, learning what those words mean is one aspect of reading, but it's really quite functional. Of course it is, because children are young, it's at a low level of performance, and managing to make what's called grapheme-phoneme correspondence, so the shape of those letters and the sounds that they make. Making that correspondence is a low-level skill. But actually, being a great reader is a high-level skill. That's something which requires all sorts of openness to inspiration and imagination, and to be able to enter the world of a book and to be able to recreate that world in their mind as they read. That's really quite sophisticated. And when I speak to parents, adults, about this, you find that there's a whole range of reading experience that people will talk about. Sometimes it divides along gender lines, and so if you talk to dads, then they'll say, well, I don't read novels. Novels aren't for me. You know, it's autobiographies all the way, or the Guinness Book of Records. You know, those are the only things I read, or maybe the newspaper. And sometimes mums say, oh, I love this novel, this is an amazing writer, this author just carried me into a different world, it was fabulous. And of course, that's a gross generalization. Of course it exists the other way around as well. But the reality is that there's a huge spectrum of reading experience and preferences amongst us as adults. So children are no different. And we need to make sure that we keep their minds open and that they're able to engage with books readily in a way that perhaps not all of us do anymore. I shared in my last workshop that my son held me to account, and as an educator it was like a dagger in my heart. He said, "I don't see you reading many books anymore, Dad." And I felt terrible. I lead workshops with parents, talking to them about the importance of reading in front of your child and how that is. And my own son said, "How about you, Dad? Are you walking the walk?" And of course that's really important, and from time to time we need to hold ourselves to account. Because the first book that any child reads is you. They read your behaviour. Children are brilliant. They're fantastic imitators. They copy things. Now, we all know this as parents, and we know this because we've often said to our child, "I don't think you should hang out with that person anymore. I don't think they're a good influence on you." Parents always say this, don't they? For thousands of years, parents have been saying, "I don't think that child is a good influence on you. Why don't you get another friend?" We're always very good at judging the friends around our child and saying, "Your behaviour is not a result of your genes. It's nothing to do with me. It's those friends you hang out with." But the reality is, of course, that children are very influenced by the people around them. And some of the people that influence them, of course, in fact, one could say the most important people that influence them are you. And so if you don't read, then your child will understand that that means reading isn't important. If you don't do it, they'll understand it. And so the reality is, your child will look at you and say, "Well, what are you into?" And what you're into generally nowadays is your phone. You tend to be into your phone. You tend to be into texting. You tend to be into Facebook and Instagram. If you're old like me, you tend to be into emailing. And if you're really old, then you're into someone else pressing the buttons for you because you can't get your fingers to hit them anymore. But the reality is, we're fixated on our device. And then look at our children who are fixated on their devices. Now, partly that's because the devices are designed the way they are. They're designed to be addictive and all the software that goes on them. But a lot of it is about your behaviour, my behaviour as a parent. That's what the children imitate. They grow to understand that. We all know this. When you meet a child and then you meet the parent, or when you meet a parent and then you meet their children, you can see the connection between the two. There's a phrase in English that says the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. That actually the offspring of the adult is very similar to the adult. And of course that's partly genetics, but a lot of it is the nurture. It's not just nature, it's nurture. So your role as a parent is to nurture great readers. And what's happened in the early part of the primary school is that your child has been taught to read. But actually a passion for reading, that's something else. That's a magical thing. And you come into your own. You are extremely important in terms of nurturing your child's passion. So today we're going to look at 10 different things that you can do to support your child. But the first one, the most important, the secret to nurturing your child as a great reader is just to relax. So this isn't a guilt trip workshop. It's not a way for you to beat yourself up and say, "I'm a terrible parent. I only get 10 minutes with my child every day, and in those 10 minutes, I spend 8 minutes of it looking at my phone, and the other 2 minutes complaining about what a terrible day I've had at work." This isn't one of those workshops. This is a workshop that says, whatever time you have, we can use it to make your child, your older primary age child, a better reader. So just relax. Relax into the fact that whatever time you have, we can do something with it. Whatever skill set you have, whatever resources you have, we can do something with those. So we're going to look at 10 different things that you can do as a parent to help to support your child. So the first one is this: let your child choose. Now this is very difficult This is particularly difficult for motivated parents. And because you're here, I know that you're motivated parents. So motivated parents tend to take a very close interest in their child's progress. What books are you choosing there, John? Oh, they look a bit simple. Why don't you choose something that's a bit more challenging? Or, you've read that 78 times already. Why don't we choose something else? And before you know it, your child is thinking, I wish I hadn't brought mum or dad to choose this book, because I was having a great time till they got involved. So the first rule is, let your child drive it. Now that's a bit tricky, because what you'll find is they'll choose things that you don't approve of. Maybe they choose a book which is all about zombies or vampires. Maybe they choose to read graphic novels all the time, and you say, come on, we should be into chapter books, we should be reading J.K. Rowling, you know, all these other children are in your class. That's another classic parental line, isn't it? All those other children are doing this, why aren't you? And we can tend to feel that the choices that our child is making is not actually supporting their progress. But the reality is, if we start to suppress their choice, if we start to take control of it, it starts to become a chore. It's a task that we're giving children. Choose a book, you have to read it now. As opposed to, hey, let's read a book. Now, I'm a big believer in established times to read, but I'm not a big believer in an established time to read that is the only time to read. So really what I would encourage us all as parents to do is to be very spontaneous. You can be reading at any time. You can be reading shop signs, pamphlets, leaflets, magazines, the newspaper, a website, on a Kindle, other devices are available. Whatever it might be, you can choose to read at that time. And what we're interested in is putting our child in a disposition of choice. We want them to be able to choose to read. Now it's quite interesting living here in Dubai. It's very hot in the day. So sometimes, I come from the UK where it's either cold or raining. Those are the two weather choices that you get in the UK. Sometimes they come together at the same time. So being here in Dubai, actually, I don't always choose to be out in the sunshine, because it's just too hot for my bald head to be out there. I just turn into a tomato if I'm not careful. So the reality is I choose to be inside sometimes. And if you're choosing to be inside, you may choose to read there. That's a choice that you can make. You don't have to be out playing football or running around with your friends. You actually might just choose to be indoors and reading. So what we're trying to do is to put our child in a position where they can choose. Put them in charge, don't disapprove, don't say, this is our time, don't read now, we're all in a rush, we're trying to get out. If they choose to pick up a book, just give them 5 minutes to read that. Just be 5 minutes late to going to that shopping mall. Just give them time. Put them in control. Rule number 2. Look for books at your child's reading level. Now, the reason that I want to talk about this is not because I think we should be fixated about what the child's reading level is. We shouldn't, in fact. And it's very good for children to have books that are easy to read and books that are challenging to read.
But I'm particularly interested for children that are aged about 8 and above, that we allow them to read books that encourage them. Very often, children at this age can be quite reluctant readers. They've got through barking at the print, but they haven't yet captured that passion. That world that can be created by a book isn't yet open to them in the same way. So they can be quite reluctant to read, especially if you have boys. Boys, of course, we know this, boys develop later than girls generally. I tend to find that boys mature around about 54 years of age. So I'm still hoping. The reality is that they're just going to be slightly later. And so that can make them reluctant to read, because they're caught between having learned to bark at the print and not quite having caught the passion of the worlds that books can create. And that period in between those two pillars is a difficult one to be in. So I'm all about the choice. And I think that children should have books that are too complicated to read and books that are too easy for them to read. I think they should have both of those ranges. But equally, we should be finding those books that are in the sweet spot for our reluctant readers, so that they're able to enjoy reading. Now, there's no shortcut to this. This is you spending a lot of time in bookshops, in libraries, looking at books and seeing what appeals to your child. Not quizzing them about it. Remember, leave their choice there. Don't say, what do you like about that? Is that word too easy or too difficult? Or is it just right? Because it has to be in the sweet spot. Don't start to take control of it. But just notice. Notice what actually is an easier sell to your child in terms of reading. And that means investing that time. And you being an investigator to that. Now, what's the point of books that are very easy and books that are very challenging? Well, very challenging books are to do with your child's ambition. They're to do with their imagination. I can remember when I was about 9, going to my local library and getting an A-level book on organic chemistry. Now, I didn't really know what it was, but I knew this. It was a very thick book, and it was full of very long words and complicated diagrams. And really what I wanted that book for, because I imagined myself to be a scientist. And so I walked around with this book. You know, I made sure that my parents saw me walking with this huge, thick A-level textbook age 9. What's that about? It's something to do with chemistry, I said. I can't really read the first word. You know, but I just felt great, and sometimes I would flick through it and wonder what on earth it was all about. Now, did it advance my reading? Probably not. But it did advance my imagination. And I did see myself as a scientist. I grew up in later years imagining that I could be a scientist. I came with a positivity. Why? In part because this book had allowed me to feel it and to be it. In educational terms, we call it wearing the mantle of the expert, where a mantle is like a cloak. Wearing the cloak of an expert. And so for children of the age range that we're talking about here, between 8 and 11 or 12 or so, actually feeling like an expert and how you feel about things is crucial. Children often talk about a loss of confidence. I don't feel my friends like me. I don't think I'm very good at that sport anymore. I don't think I can do maths. They become very sensitive to feelings at this age. So whatever we can do to allow your child to actually live and sort of stretch and stand a little taller into something is important. So therefore, complicated books are really important. Please don't say to your child, that's too difficult for you. Because we don't know what game they're playing. They might not be playing the reading game. They might be playing the I'm going to be a scientist game. Let's let them play that game. Now, why have books that are ridiculously easy? You know, why allow your child to have that? Well, because, you know, sometimes it's just good to have an easy day, isn't it? You know, sometimes it's just good to feel as though this isn't going to be hard work. I'm not going to sweat over this. It's going to be okay. I can get through this book without thinking, what is that word? What is this author going on with? What is Mum about to ask me about this book that I'm not going to be able to answer? It's nice to sometimes just to enjoy it. And what that is an opportunity for your child to enjoy reading, to say, I can do this. It's another feel-good factor. I can do this. It doesn't matter that it's simple. And in fact, for me, sometimes the most appealing books have no words in them at all. They're just picture books. They're just books full of lovely art that you can be lost in, that you can enjoy and look at, and you can create your own narrative stories. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. And in many respects, there are great reasons for wanting to be able to do that. So, the second rule, look for books at your child's reading level. And what you'll understand is that means not only something which is a sweet spot, but also either side. So the third rule, create a reading culture, model reading. This is the important bit. This is the part that my son was talking to me about. It's so important that we read and that our children catch us reading. I talked in a previous workshop about some fascinating research that's been published recently, talking about the importance of how many books you have in your house and how it correlates
to the classification of degree that your child will graduate from university with. Now, it turns out, the research has found, that if you have, let's say, 5 books in your house, then your child will graduate from university with a 3rd class degree. And if you have 55 books in your house, your child will graduate from university with a 2nd class degree. And if you have 500 books in your house, your child will graduate with a 1st class degree from university. Amazing, isn't it? Amazing that there's a correlation between the numbers of books in a house and the classification of degree that your child will graduate with. But here's the even more incredible fact. The child doesn't need to read any of those books. All that needs to happen is that you have those books in your house. Isn't that incredible? Why is that? It's all about rule number 3. It's all about creating a culture. A culture where you value reading, where your child has grown up seeing that you value reading. They don't have to have read any of the 500 books that you will now run out and purchase for your house to make sure your child gets a 1st class degree. They don't have to read any of them. Here's the rub. You do. You have to read them. Because in order for your child to get the 1st class degree, they have to be coming from a home. They don't have to. This is a generalization. There are always exceptions. But in order for your child to get a 1st class degree, the reality is, if they've grown up in a house where they see that their parents invest in learning, their parents invest in the written word, then the child is more likely to invest in the written word. Your child is more likely to learn. If they can see that you still believe in that, they will believe in it. And it's that that gets them the 1st class degree. Isn't it fascinating? They don't have to read any one of those books, but you do. And so that's really important. And of course that's a conversation that you may have with other adults at home, that you may say, let's get a range of books here. Put all of those autobiographies away. Let's read some other stuff too. Don't let yourself get into a rut. Because then your child, remember, who's an imitator, will get into a rut. So try and avoid that. So, rule number 4. Discuss what your child is reading. Now, you have to really exercise caution with this, parents, because it's very easy for you to completely kill all interest in the book by over-questioning it. Whilst I was leading a school in China, I was working with a group of parents that were very keen on this. And one parent said to me after one of the workshops, said, Dr. Hopkin, I followed your instructions in that previous workshop, which is all about questioning my child, and how important it is to connect with my child and question them. And what I'm finding is, he's not talking to me anymore. I thought, well, tell me what's happened. Well, I said to him, what have you been reading? What's interesting about that? How did the author make that work? You can imagine this poor little 8-year-old child that was on the receiving end of this saying, I wish I'd never picked up a book. I wish my dad had never gone to that workshop. The reality is, it's really important to engage with your child. Last night, Manchester United won a football match against Norwich City. I can't stand football. I have absolutely no interest in football whatsoever. But I watched a little bit of this match with my son because he's really interested in football. And so I want to be able to speak his language. In relationships generally, there's something called the love language. I don't know whether you've heard about this. But this is all about being able to connect with your partner. And what we tend to do when we connect with our partners is we give them the kind of love that we want. So perhaps you're the kind of husband who just wants affection. And so you give your wife affection and you say, darling, you look beautiful. It's wonderful to see you today. You smell so fragrant. It just lifts my soul. Now, maybe your wife isn't somebody like that. Maybe your wife is a C person. Not a feel person, but a C person. Now, C people, they like bling. And so the wife says, what do you mean you love me and I smell fragrant? Don't give me that. I want stuff. That's a disconnect. It's a miss. Because the language of love that the husband might be speaking isn't the language of love that the wife receives. And so it doesn't matter how sincerely we express our love, actually, if the person receiving it is wired to receive something different, they don't hear it at all. This is how I was with my son. I don't like football, but he does. And so I want to be able to have a conversation with him about that, so I watch a bit of football. My dad did the same with me. My dad was a very small, little, peaceful man, and I was into going to the gym and doing karate. And I'd come back from my karate sessions, and my tiny little dad would say, "So, what have you learned tonight?" And I would show him the stuff I'd learned. He had no interest in it at all. You couldn't have thought of a less sort of physically aggressive person than my dad. But actually, he wanted to speak my love language. He wanted to connect with me. Now, discussing what your child is reading is just like a love language. It's about you not bringing your agenda about what your child ought to know about a book and how a book is put together and how an author creates stories and accounts. It's not that. It's trying to get into your child's mind, trying to understand what has captured their interest. What images are they seeing in their mind? I believe in the power of film. And I think film is really important for children imagining stories. And so, in their mind's eye, when a child comes to write a story, often they see the film in their imagination. They see what's going to happen. What they struggle with is getting it down into words. And we're going to talk about that in a future workshop. But reading is very similar. When you read something, it creates images in your mind. So when you're talking with your child, what you're doing is trying to get them to describe those images. Not the words, but actually what the words have created in their imagination. Because that's what is engaging them, the images that are created. Have you ever had that experience when you read a book and you say, "Oh no, that's not right. That's not what that person is like"? Well, it's because you have created an image of what that person is. And then the producers and directors have created another image. And it's just as faithful as yours, it's just a different one. Everyone is creating these images in their mind. And when we talk with our children, what we want to do is to talk about them. Why do you think he did that? Or why does he like that person? Or why is he scared of that person? You just get into their picture so they can tell you about it. So, talking with your child is really important. And there are different ways to talk. So it may be the case that you want to talk about the whole story. It may be the case that you just want to talk about where the story is now, or where the story is about to go, or what's happened before. I always like the parenting role where you fall asleep. I think that's a really good parenting role. Try and fall asleep a lot more with your child. And so they're reading to you and you sort of nod off a little bit. And then after a few seconds, you come back into full consciousness and you say, "Oh, I'm really sorry, I just nodded off for a minute. Can you just tell me what's just happened? Don't read the whole thing again. Just tell me what's just happened." So that the child can then summarize that little part. Sometimes I do it just in front of the TV. And so maybe there's some show playing and you nod off again. Nodding off is a big feature of my parenting style. So you nod off again, and then after a few seconds you come back into consciousness, you say, "Oh, what's happened? I just missed this." And they have to summarize it. And being able to summarize large or smaller parts of a story is a really useful skill for a child, because it keeps them right on the edge of where the story is. And they're learning to interpret and compact this story into a small part. Number 5. Resist the urge to be critical. Now this is important as very motivated parents. You stand right on the edge of the urge to be critical because you're keen for your child to progress, keen for your child to be number one, keen for your child to be doing so much better than everybody else. You're desperate to be able to take a picture of your child, age 7, holding a huge thick copy of Harry Potter and then put it all over Facebook to say to all of your girlfriends, "I'm so pleased, look at my darling little child reading this huge book that they can hardly hold. I had to hold it for them, it's such a big book." That's what our culture tends to do nowadays. So in reality, you can bring a lot of that sort of urge to where the book is. Now, the children have ups and downs. my son went through a period when he looked a lot at graphic novels, and I knew that his reading was far in advance of the language that he would find in graphic novels. And in fact, worse than that, graphic novels tend to have big bubbles or little call-out captions, so he wasn't even seeing the structure of prose. And it was frustrating for me, and I really had to bite my tongue not to say, these graphic novels are rubbish, can we get back to the real books? And look, there's not even any sort of punctuation that's decent in there. Come on, let's get back to J.K. Rowling and others. Had to stop. And I'm so glad, retrospectively, that I did keep biting my tongue. Because, of course, that fad just phased out. And he got back to where he's comfortable and stimulated by his reading, which is more complex stuff. So the reality is, as parents, we have to try quite hard to resist that drive and that criticism. Maybe that your child isn't reading enough, maybe they're not reading for long enough, maybe you feel the books that they're not reading are complicated or challenging enough. Just try and resist that. Try and put yourself in the disposition where you say, I am grateful that my child is reading anything. And I'm going to get my enthusiasm behind that. Because if I can just keep moving rather than grinding to a halt, if I can just keep my child moving, then naturally they will return to books that are more challenging, more engaging, more interesting, because they're hungry for that. So the important thing is just to keep reading. And sometimes it will feel with your child that the only thing that you're reading is the back of a cereal packet and a shop sign that says when the shop's going to be open. Sometimes it will just feel like that you're hardly doing any reading at all. It's okay. Just keep the juggernaut moving, because it will all come. So remember that first rule before any of these 10 rules. Just relax. Just relax. Keep it reading. Keep role modeling. Keep doing what you need to do. Keep picking another one of those 500 books that's going to get your child the first class degree. Keep picking it and reading it. Let your child walk in on you and find you with your nose in a book, not on your phone. Those things themselves will keep the whole thing moving, as long as they're just doing a little bit of reading. Rule number 6, find a compelling series. At the age of children that we're talking about, there are millions, that might be an exaggeration, hundreds of thousands of series of books. And there's a reason for this, there's a commercial reason for this, that authors know if by any chance their book comes to be popular, then they know if they fill the shop's bookcases with 10 more versions of that book, all these little 8, 9, 10, 11-year-olds will rush to buy it. So this is their pension fund that you're creating. But for us, as parents of children, that's a really great thing, because it keeps that momentum up. The child becomes very familiar with characters, and the child starts to develop an opinion about what that character should do, or would do, or could do. They start to think and even sometimes talk like the characters that they're reading, because the world becomes even more real for them. So series are really important, and I would encourage you in libraries and in bookshops to spend some time with your 8, 9, 10, 11-year-old finding some series and just introducing 1 or 2 books. It doesn't have to be the very first one in the series. Just find a book there that captures their interest, because you know that it will pay dividends and return to that. Rule number 7. Try to connect with your child's passion. If you find that your child actually isn't that keen at reading, or you feel as though they're slightly stuck in the mud in terms of moving on and keeping that momentum going, try and approach it differently and think to yourself, well, okay, what is my child interested in? And I, at one point in my son's development, I had to resort to football annuals. We had multiple copies of Manchester United annual in our house. I can't tell you how uninteresting the Manchester United annual is. Apologies to anyone that created it, but it's terrible. It's really uninteresting. But it was a book that my son would carry with him and want to turn to and read all the time. It kept the momentum going. Now, it wasn't Shakespeare. It wasn't something that was going to, I felt, deliver him that first class degree that those 500 books had promised me. None of that was there.
but it kept him interested until he could return to Philip Pullman and other great authors in the end. So maybe your child is interested in a particular sport, maybe they're interested in cars, maybe they're interested in horses, ballet dancing, it could be anything. But if you find that your child is a little reluctant to read, try to actually circumnavigate the block, which is the book, and try and focus more on the passion and the interest that they have. And then find anything about those things that you can. So that actually that just feeds that sense that actually I can pursue my passions through books. So if I'm interested in horses, I don't just have to go horse riding. I can read about horses in many, many different forms. I can learn facts about horses. I can read stories which feature horses as their main characters. I can look at films about horses. There's a brilliant film called Spirit. I don't know whether you've ever seen that. Beautiful, beautiful animation all about horses, in case you are interested in horses. You can actually just pursue your child's passion through books. And that's something that's really helpful. Number 8. Sometimes your child will be interested in what's going on in the world. Now, I don't necessarily mean that your child is interested in Brexit. Nobody's interested in Brexit anymore. What I mean is, there might be something in the news that your child is interested in. Now, this might be something that's emerging perhaps from studies they're doing in school. Maybe they've been learning all about certain features of volcanoes. And maybe you decide that you're going to investigate what happened in Pompeii. And you have a little book. And there are some wonderful, wonderful books around that illustrate that for children, that illustrate fantastic facts, really interestingly. I got into a series of books for my son, and it was one of those investment points. A series of books that were talking about characters. They were biographies. And so they were talking about John Lennon or Barack Obama, a whole bunch of different people. And I bought a series of these, and when I first got them, my son wasn't interested in them at all. But it's been fascinating over the course of a couple of years, so a long-term investment. Over a couple of years, suddenly, he started turning to these. And when I go into his bedroom now, I find 2 or 3 littered around that he's been looking at, or in conversation, suddenly some fact about JFK will emerge in the conversation. And you think, where's this come from? And then, oh, it's come from this book. There's that little book off the shelf that he's had a little look at. And so sometimes contemporary news is really important. Now, that's another great opportunity for you as a parent, because it just means that you can talk at the dinner table about what's going on in the world. And very often, children are just curious. Why is that? Donald Trump has been absolutely brilliant for our dinner table conversation. So, the children are fascinated in Donald Trump because he's unpredictable and we don't know what's going to happen. And the children feel that they connect with Donald Trump in some way. So the reality is that actually you can use things that are going on in everyday life to spark conversation, to spark interest, and for that interest to take you towards some kind of reading. Find your inner child when reading. I love this, because this is the bit that actually all of us secretly still want to do. But publicly we're terrified to do it. Now, when you read to your child, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you can put to one side your mature, intellectual adulthood, and you can become a child again. So, what day is it? Said Pooh. It's today! Squeaked Piglet. Oh, my favourite day, said Pooh. Now, I'm a teacher, I'm a primary teacher by trade. I have no problem talking like that to you. Who else wants to have a little go at just saying that now? That's always the response you get. Everyone looks down, don't pick on me. I knew it. I'm not coming to his maths talk. I know he's going to pick on me in that. So the reality is, as adults, we very often don't want to animate our voices. We don't want to make it come alive, unless we have a child with us. But remember, the first book that most children read is you. So I'd encourage you just to rediscover your inner child, whether your child is there or not. Rediscover what it is like to animate your voice and become interesting. Maybe when you're driving home today and someone pulls out on you, why don't you say, "Oh, my favourite day," and just put a little voice in and let that happen, rather than what you would normally say when that happens. And so just learn to adopt different characters. Because of I have a very playful personality, so when my children are growing up, I spend the whole time putting words into their expression. When they're pre-linguistic, they're not saying anything. I'll say, "Oh yeah, I was thinking about doing that, Dad, but then I thought I'd actually just hit you over the head with a mallet instead." And so I just put words into their mouth that aren't really there. But what it means is that my children grow up hearing voices and characters all the time. What do I find now with my 12-year-old son? He puts voices to things all the time. Why? Because children are imitators, and the first book they read is you. And so the reality is that we can help children bring a book alive by our immediate ability to be able to connect with us in a childish way. And really, to connect with us in a childish way also means when you read something that's funny, just rolling around on the floor with your legs in the air, just laughing, a real belly laugh, is really important for the children. When I was very young, in Winnie the Pooh, which is one of my favourite books, there's a little section in there, I don't know whether you remember this part of the story, when it's Eeyore's birthday, and so Winnie the Pooh decides that he's going to take a pot of honey to Eeyore to celebrate it, and Piglet decides that he's going to take a balloon to Eeyore. Now what happens is Piglet trips over, he bursts the balloon, and Pooh just decides he wants to check that the honey really tastes really good because it's a birthday present, so he ends up eating all of the honey. And they arrive, and Eeyore just puts the balloon in and out of the empty honey pot and says, "I can't believe it, my birthday, what this, for me, amazing." Now, when I read that as a little child, it tickled me a little bit. But when I read it as an adult, it really tickled me because I've met a lot of Eeyores in my life by then. So when I was reading it to my child, I'm rolling around, doing the voice, "Oh, really, amazing, my birthday, incredibly thoughtful." And I rolled around. What I found was that my son then rolled around much more heartily than I did. Now maybe he has a more developed sense of humour when he was little than I had. I don't know. But I'm convinced that there was something about the enjoyment that I got from reading this that actually transmitted itself to him. You know how children, very young children, they laugh. If you laugh, they laugh, and they don't even know what they're laughing at. Well, actually, when they're slightly older, we can teach them what to laugh at, and how to enjoy it, and how to enjoy the text. So, find your inner child, and my encouragement is not only to find your inner child when you're reading with your child. Find your inner child every minute of the day, even when your children aren't there. Because then when you are with your children, it will come out so much more easily. And then the 10th rule, speculate to accumulate. Build a love of words. It's the love of words that we're after. It's the children rejoicing in the text itself. And then you can get all of your driven helicopter parent angst out, and you can say, "Oh, well, why do you think David Walliams wrote like that? And what do you think they were trying?" You can do it then. On the 10th rule, you can have a little bit of that, indulge yourself, and allow yourself to just talk all the way around the book, to talk about all the different features, to ask every question you want. Because here's the thing, just relax. It's okay. It's okay to ask lots of questions as long as that's not the only thing you do. It's okay to celebrate just on picture books as long as that's not the only thing you do. It's okay to be the kind of parent you want to be because you're just excited about books. Let that just come out, however you want it to come out. So, thanks very much for listening. I'm happy to take any of your questions now. Thank you. So this is always my favourite part, when parents have questions, because there are always really
finding compelling series, for example, because that's what everybody's into.
Yeah.
And he sees he wants to be like everybody else.
Yeah.
Because now there's a lot of the peer pressure going on. And for me, that was where it felt, I used to read so many better books than this, and now you're going into these. And for me, the fear of series are It's a great series. C.S. Lewis series, he started it, great series, I'll push you for it. But then you go to, I haven't read them, but Diary of the Wimpy Kid, or Horrid Henry, or these Dirty Bird. I don't know as much of the content, I know a little bit of it, but getting into a series means, for me, that you now stop exposing yourself to the different kinds of books that you might just go and pick up, and then you see yourself stuck on a series, and that's all you're doing. And for me, it was the content itself. When my son started saying, I want to read Dogman, everybody's reading it, I want to read it. I was like, wait a minute, let me go through the content first and see if I'm okay with it. And again, at first I was like, I didn't have the time to do so. I was like, you know what, I know that you want comics. Because he said, I don't want text anymore, chapter books, I just want to read things in bundles. Again, I felt, okay, great. We'll go out and search for comics. Then I'm okay. So when he found Tintin in the library, I was like, great, you know what, go ahead. But again, I feel when it comes to letting your children choose, I know that he has a variety, and then I wish he would get out of the comics, and it's fine. He goes through that. But still within, you know, I still
Okay,
feel...
so, well, thank you for embodying so many of those points. That's brilliant, because we're all there with you. We're all on that journey at various different points, and what you've done perfectly there is illustrate that wrestling match that parents go through. Because what you're describing is your passion for literature and your intellect that you're bringing to the choices that your child could make in terms of the books that they read, and your love for it and your desire for that to be stimulating and fulfilling and a sort of a lifelong gift that you've given your child on the one hand, and on the other hand, your child's desire to read for fun. and what happens is, just as I've been saying here, you get that contrast between those two. But it's very, very difficult for us as parents. So what I want you to try and do for all of us, this counts for all of us that find ourselves in this situation. I know I have certainly had that experience from time to time on my journey with my children's reading, is to understand what the aim is. Now, if the aim is to give your child a canon of literature, so by the time you're 16, you're going to have read Treasure Island, etc., 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 because you think that's important, then you can carry on editing and controlling the content in the series. My suspicion is that if you do that, you will ensure that when your child is 25, 35, 45, they never pick a book up again. And that's the gamble that you're playing. Now, of course, it's a generalization, and some children will because their parents have introduced them to the canon and it was life-transforming. But for many children, it will be a turn-off. Because the alternative is that your objective, your aim, is to make sure that your child is a passionate reader. Now, what you're having to do is a leap of faith. You're standing on the edge of the abyss, and you're saying, if I give control of the canon of literature that you are going to expose yourself to, darling child, then I'm taking a leap of faith into the dark, because I'm allowing you to go to graphic novels or comics or whatever it might be, bubble stuff rather than chapter books and paragraphs and literature. I'm allowing you to make those choices, and you may never resurface again. Now, it's probably just not true that they're never going to resurface again, because you know what? It's just a phase. It's just a phase. On the other hand, if they do never resurface again, and if they develop a lifelong love for graphic novels, is that such a bad thing? Is that a terrible thing? Now, of course you would say, well, it's not what I wanted, but maybe graphic novels won't be the only thing that they ever read, but maybe that's their passion. What you really want is a passionate reader, who from time to time will move away from graphic novels and will add in a bit of Shakespeare and a bit of Philip Pullman, and etc., etc. So it's interesting that you talked about Diary of a Wimpy Kid, because my journey was exactly the same as yours over Diary of a Wimpy Kid. I'd never read it. Now, I'm an educator and I'm very interested in children's development. I'd never read Diary of a Wimpy Kid, and there was a reason for that. I didn't like the title. I just didn't like the title. I didn't like the title that said Wimpy Kid. I thought, I'm not even going to look at that. It doesn't feel very British. And Brexit isn't mentioned, and it doesn't feel very positive. I just don't like the illustration on the cover. I didn't even look at it. And I was travelling around a lot, driving a lot with my family in the car, and so we used quite a lot of audiobooks. And audiobooks are quite tricky to get hold of in some parts of the world. And at one point, the only new audiobooks that I could find were Diary of a Wimpy Kid. So I bought one and put it in so that my son could listen to it as I was driving along. Do you know, it's brilliantly written. It's clever. It's funny. There are narrative elements to it that are for adults. It's one of those kind of things. Sometimes when you go to the theatre, there are bits for adults and there are bits for children. And it goes over the children's head, but all the adults are giggling in the audience. It's written like that as well. It's beautifully written. It's not Shakespeare. It's not Philip Pullman or J.K. Rowling or anybody like that. But it is nice work. And what I found was that I could have lots of discussions about the characters with my son. Now, actually, he didn't stay in it very long. And before long, we were into Harry Potter. And then after Harry Potter, we got into Philip Pullman. And suddenly we're reading very sophisticated books. But I haven't forgotten that Diary of a Wimpy Kid was there on his journey when he was about 8 or 9 or so. And so I think the lesson that I've learned is not to worry about it. That's why right at the beginning, before we get into any of the 10 rules, I say just relax. It's going to be okay. What we can do is completely derail our child's reading journey by trying to control it too much. So, just to sort of solve your conscience and to give you another way of expressing that anxiety, come back to the 500 books. And come back to what you've already learnt, actually, in your own family, which is, do you know what, it's okay to have that book, because my child will get to it eventually. And the important thing is that you're creating the culture of the books. You can read some of those other books that you wish that your child was reading. You can be caught reading them, so they get curious about it. And then just let them choose what they're going to choose for now. Keep the momentum going. Okay, thank you. That's a great question. It means that control is something that you really want. And all of us wrestle with this as parents. So, in terms of dyslexia, there are various different forms that can take for a child, and sometimes it can be to do with words moving on a page. So sometimes that's about trying acetates or different spectacles that a child can wear to help the word stabilise. Sometimes it can be around letter reversals or completely changing position within a word that make it difficult for the child to recognise words. And so it's a little bit like the section where I was talking about, so the second rule, choosing books for your child's level. And what I would say is that having a range of books on the go all at the same time is really important for me. So I don't ever want my children just to be reading one book. Let them have 3, 4, 5 books on the go. And what that enables all children to do is to move as their interests dictate. It's a little bit like having an automatic car. If you have a gear shift car where you're having to move it, you're either in 2nd gear or 3rd gear or 4th gear, and you're having to do a lot of computing and shifting and hard work. Whereas with an automatic car, you're just thinking about your position, and the car does that bit and puts it in the right gear for you. Having multiple books is a little bit like that. That actually, if you have multiple books on the go, then the child can shift between different levels of complexity. Because our aim, I'm arguing, is actually the momentum of reading. We want to keep our child reading and reading broadly and across a range. So I would actually encourage you, and it helps you with that feeling of wanting to control it or influence it a little bit. I would encourage you to have a range of books. This also speaks to your question. Have a range of books, but allow your child to move between them. So maybe with that complicated book that's challenging, maybe they just read a paragraph or a sentence or a little section. But they're dipping their toe into it, and the self-esteem of that is really important. I'm reading Harry Potter too. You know, everyone is reading Harry Potter, so am I. But actually they're just reading a little bit. And maybe you read quite a lot of Harry Potter to them, but they just read a sentence or a paragraph and they're done. And then you can do some of the heavy lifting so that they keep up with the narrative.
But at other times, they're reading books which are simpler, or they're easier to decode and to spot, so that you're keeping that momentum going. So it's very much a blend of their choice, and I would sort of avoid the control, but your influence by the culture and the environment you create. And you reading with a child is really important. So just because they become older doesn't mean that we have to stop reading with them. You just read differently. Maybe you take turns to read a page. Maybe you take turns to read a paragraph. Maybe you read most of the chapter and they just read a portion of it. Maybe they read a chapter and you read a chapter. Maybe you're just in the same room and you're reading at the same time, but your own books. So there are different ways of being with your child, and with a child that has a particular challenge around the reading, whatever that challenge might be, employing a different series of those helps to mix it up, and it doesn't make them feel as though, oh, I always need mum to help me with this because it's difficult and I find reading difficult. If you're doing that with all the books, they don't notice it at all, because that's just how you are with them when you read together. And again, that keeps self-esteem high. And keeping self-esteem high is really important.
And maybe more accessible for the kids. So how can we put it in within the flow of actually opening an actual book and reading?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And it's a question that for the last 20 years in various different forms parents have asked me about, and particularly as technology has developed. So do I believe in real books, paper books, that have a smell and have a crack to the spine and you can fold a corner down? And if you're one of those people that likes to mark a book, some people, if they see a book that's marked, they're furious. Why is someone written in this book, whereas other people love it because it's a sign of being loved? Am I a believer in all of those realities of the book? Yes, I am. I am a believer in the library, whether it's within the community or within a school. I'm a believer in the library being full of real books that have a smell and a texture to them. I think there's an aesthetic to a book that is an important part of the experience. But that doesn't mean that I throw the baby out with the bathwater. Audiobooks have been a lifeline for me at different points in my career when I've been travelling a lot or been doing long commutes with my son, taking him to school. The audiobook has actually made that car journey something which has been not only bearable but actually really stimulating. At one point he got into Greek mythology, and I learnt a lot listening to the audiobooks of various stories of Greek myths as we were driving in. But he became an expert and could tell you all sorts of things about Pericles and blah 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 blah. And gosh, where's all this come from? An audiobook. And I wonder whether he might have accessed the book in the same way had it been a written book as opposed to one that was spoken to him. There have been other books that You're a Bad Man, Mr. Gum. I don't know whether you've seen the Mr. Gum series. I love it. And there are 2 audiobook versions that I have both copies. One of which is by the author, who does it brilliantly, puts real characterization into the voices, and he's the person that wrote it, so you feel as though that's what it ought to sound like. And then Kate Winslet did a version, and she was amazing. Her ability to change her voice was absolutely spellbinding. She was fantastic. I've always been quite a fan of Kate Winslet, but actually after I heard the audiobook, even more so. It was brilliant. And so audiobooks, I think, and so having the same book and 2 different narrators to that really brought it home to me, quite how amazing that is. So I think audiobooks have a place. There's a wonderful series by Hugh Laurie of Roald Dahl books. A children's book, The Giraffe, the Pelly and Me, Hugh Laurie has narrated, and it's an amazing voice characterization. So sometimes when you get really skillful actors that are able to do wonderful things with their voice and create amazing images in your mind, I think audiobooks are fantastic in a way that actually a book itself can't really compete with. But of course what it's doing is it's motivating differently. It's not an aesthetic. You sort of sit back and it washes over you and it carries you to a place in a way that when you're reading a book, you're actually engaged here aesthetically in it. And that's a different way of being carried away. And both are equally valuable, I think. And then, of course, we come to the Kindle. And opinion is very divided. A Kindle is the equivalent of homework. Some parents think homework is brilliant, and some parents think homework is terrible. Most children think it's terrible. But parents, have forgotten that childhood experience, and they sort of decamp into these two different areas. But the reality is that actually a Kindle is something that some people think is brilliant because you can travel with 20 books and it only weighs a few grams, and that's wonderful. And so it means your child can read all the time. And other people think it's a slippery slope towards a child being fixated on an iPad. And of course there's truth to both of those elements. So I think, as a bottom line, what do I think? Well, unsurprisingly, I think actually everything in little and often measure is a good thing. I do think it's a good idea for children to be reading text on an electronic device, because I don't know what their future is going to hold. I don't know what the future of publishing will be. None of us get to control that in the world. And I want my child to be able to enjoy reading on a Kindle, and to do that in a way that doesn't make their eyes strain. So I'm thinking about the screen technology that I want to use. Do I want it on an iPad? Or do I actually want a Kindle where the illumination is completely different? Is that something I want? Do I think actually that's better for the planet anyway? To think about those issues. Do I want them to enjoy storytelling, so therefore the audio book, and actually having a story told to them? Yes, I absolutely want that. And do I want them always to have a house full of 500 books, get their first class degree, but smell the paper and feel the weight of that book in their hands? Yes, I want that too. I want them to love the whole dynamic of reading a book. So I think for me, it's actually about getting a balance of all three. My own personal preference is the book. That's just where my heart lies. I think that's best. But I recognise that I'm in my 50s, I might be set in my ways. Maybe that's part of it. I grew up with books, I didn't have the other devices. So actually that wasn't available to me. What I did do was I grew up with people reading to me and telling stories, and then when I developed my own internal voice and all the characterizations, that would bring it to me. So actually my preference lies with the storytelling and either the audiobooks or the book itself. I think they both have great value. If it's a great actor who's voicing it that can really add something magical. Thank you, that's a great question. Yes?
You highlighted in the beginning of your statement then about highlighting.
And my youngest son's got a fixation of highlighting the book at the moment.
Yes.
And I'm a bit like, no, you can't highlight the book. So would you encourage that then?
Yeah. Do you know what? I would encourage anything that made them interested in reading. And if they're highlighting words that interest them, work with that. Work with, that's a great word, I love that word. Why don't we use that word 3 times this week? Just get behind anything which is starting to grab them. So when my son was younger, I used to do a lot of that. So we'd find words that he really liked, and then during the course of the week, we tried to find people that we could use that word to describe. And just find a way to play with it, because it's a way of making the book become real and reality become linked to books.
So does it change then if you, obviously books are expensive, that's one bet.
Yeah.
But would you then say, does it take the magical part away from it if you said, okay, well, let's go and photocopy the book and then highlight the words?
No, I don't think it changes that at all. Nor do I think it takes any of the magic away. If you say to your child, this is a precious book, or this book isn't ours, we borrowed this book, we can't do that. So you just find another strategy, you just write that word down, or you just talk about it. And you say, let's remember. And then what you're doing is you're working on a different part of your child's development, which is actually to do with their working memory and expanding that. So I don't think in any sense it takes the magic away, and arguably, by valuing the book and saying, well, we mustn't mark that because we don't want to spoil it for somebody else, and not everybody likes a book to be marked, then you're teaching your child how to be respectful of other people, so it's a great character strength. So I think, as I said right at the beginning, it's okay just to relax. It will be okay. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for your questions. Please make sure that you've signed up. We will send the talk to you, and of course the talk will be available to you on YouTube. If you're struggling to sleep and you want to watch it all again. Thanks very much. Thank you.